All right, hello and welcome to the Ed Collab gathering and welcome to our presentation, Upping Your Read Aloud Game. I'm Christy Glazer.
I'm Corby Saunders. So my pronouns are they, them. I am a biracial educator. I teach sixth grade core in the morning, which is reading, writing, and social studies. And then in the afternoon, I am an instructional coach at an elementary school.
And I'm Christy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white, cisgender, very proud principal of an elementary school. Corby and I work together in Corby's role as an instructional coach. And Corby inspired me years ago, 8 years ago, when I started as a principal to do a read aloud in every classroom every month. Corby helps find those books and write them up. And it's just the absolute joy of my job to deliver those read alouds and spend time with kiddos. And that's what really inspired our work here today. We always like to start our presentations anywhere we are, in person or virtually, with a land acknowledgement. We are presenting from the Ohlone and Chicano lands here in the West Coast. And we do want to acknowledge, though, that showing a slide is not enough. That is a performative act that we're putting out into the world. And we realize that to really honor our Indigenous ancestors and the people that were on this land in the past and the present and the future of these lands, that we really need to create an action plan of how to honor the Indigenous people. Some things that you can do to create an action plan is a regular donation to an Indigenous tribe or organization. You can plan to participate in some protests that an Indigenous tribe might be doing in your area. You can also make that commitment to not support cultural appropriation of Indigenous art and jewelry and clothing, and make sure that when you do purchase those items, you do it from a Native owned businesses. Just some things you could do.
All right, so some big goals for our session today is that we want to talk about how to up our read aloud games, because most of us are doing read alouds on a regular basis in our classrooms. But so how do we get the most bang for our buck during our time with students? So we're going to be looking at how to write read alouds up for social justice, transformative social emotional wellness, as that's a big topic currently, and then ABAR work, which is anti-bias, anti-racist work in the classroom, and helping kids understand like why it's so important to talk about these topics in the classroom. And then the next part of our session, we're going to be doing some read alouds. And how do we do this in a way that's really responsive to the kids that are actually in front of us at the moment, and giving kids multiple opportunities for either direct skill instruction, or if it's a skill that they already have been practicing, how do we give them more time for repeated practice with feedback? And then finally, we're going to share the steps on how to build a focused read aloud around social justice standards from Learning for Justice, and then the CASTLE framework when we're talking about social emotional wellness.
And so what has inspired so much of our work and so many of the authors and inspirational people around is really this quote by Angela Davis. It's, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. And we included not only the time that Angela Davis first said this quote, but also her work has brought us all the way through to today and is just as important. And so we'd like to share some definitions and assumptions that we operate off of, so you know where we come from when we're speaking today. So we operate under the belief that race and gender are a social construction in our society, and that we live in a society that does include individual, structural, and systemic racism. You know, as Dr. Lori Watson shares, well-meaning people perpetuate racism and uphold the racist system we live in, even without our knowing. So not to make anyone feel guilty or shamed by any of this work that we do. It's all about when we learn more, we do better, the Maya Angelou quote. So we want to make sure that we are supporting all humans in our society. And We also want to point out in Tiffany Jewell's book, this book is anti-racist. She really uplifts using the term people of the global majority when we're talking about Black, Indigenous, people of color, because really accidentally what that term does is it centers whiteness and others people of the Black, Indigenous, people of color community. So we have chosen to use people of the global majority as our terminology instead. And we also want to point out that when you're doing social justice, social emotional, anti-racist, anti-bias work, it is so important that you are doing that internal understanding and thinking and grappling with these topics as well. Practice getting comfortable having these topics with your friends, your colleagues, people around you in your life, because the more you practice, it's like a muscle, the better you get at it. And also, you want to seek out the different perspectives of people around you. Dr. Watson, that I mentioned earlier, the founder of Race Work and facilitates a lot of professional development. We've brought her to our staff as well. She really shares the importance of knowing what is happening in the world and how it connects to the history and how those systems of racism and oppression have come repeated and cycled through the world, and knowing what we do in the world makes a difference, and having that history helps us do better as we learn. So really thinking about what's in your world, what information you seek out, what does your social media feed look at, like what books do you read, what authors do you read, what podcasts do you listen to, how can you diversify your perspective so it's not just from one. Like when I started really paying attention to this work, I realized so much of what I consumed was what I was comfortable with, was part of my white culture, that was just what I'd seen and known. And it was really especially Corby has helped in this friendship. We really push each other and make sure that we're not only widening our perspectives, but connecting the perspectives of the students and the families and our community and our school. Our school is 40% Asian, 18% Latinx. And I found that myself, I thought I was being diverse by reading lots of Black stories, which I was more comfortable with. But while that is important so much to learn history, we've got to make sure that we're also including those perspectives of other people that are in our community as well. So it's so important to have those partners along the way to keep you accountable.
And just to tack on to what Christy was saying, this work is hard work, both for students and teachers. And so one thing that we have to be really mindful of is coming at this work from a place of love, right? That is going to be sustainable over time. But if you're doing it in reaction to or out of fear, the work will putter out. And so make sure that we are coming at this at a place of love for our students, love for the work, love for our fellow humans on the planet. And so we want to talk a little bit about why is anti-bias, anti-racist, or ABAR, transformative social emotional wellness and social justice work important to our classrooms. So we broke it up into 4 areas, right? So like the understanding and knowing that racism is just a part of our lives. It's all around us. It's the fog that we breathe, the air that we breathe, the water we swim in. It's everywhere, right? We can't escape it at the moment. And so understanding how these systems influence what goes on today is really important. When we think about transformative social emotional wellness, this is one thing where we want to uplift what kids are already doing really well in this area, especially right now while we're in a pandemic and we don't know how long the pandemic will continue. It's like looking at what is it that kids do well socially already and giving them an opportunity to continue practice those skills and even growing those skills. And then also looking at what areas do kids need more support in, right? They need more direct instruction around how to do something. Could be relationship skills with other humans. It might be looking at ourselves, emotional, internal, and understand how that internal emotions function in our bodies. How does it come out physically? And like when we are off and we're upset, but we can't figure out why, this is like the root cause of this. So it's important to be able to name some of those things. And then we want to think about sort of like understanding and noticing the injustices around us, and not just like notice it, but then also like what can we do to help change it, right? That we want the humans that are growing in our classrooms to be really compassionate people, right? That go out in the world and do good things, that have a good sense of understanding of their own identity and how they walk through the world, and how other people walk through the world may be different than themselves, right? And when we see things, we don't just stand by and let it happen, but how do we speak up? How do we actively change even our small corner of the universe to be a better place? And that's where the inspiring comes in too, is looking at the multiple perspectives so that students can understand what it's like to be somebody else. And then finally, we want to move from allyship to co-conspirator. So allyship is we want them to step in and support other students when they see something going on, community members, but then also the co-conspirator. It's not like I'm just going to stand here and support you in the moment, but also then being a co-conspirator and thinking about what can I do to change my little portion of the world, even when something negative isn't happening, but like long-term, how can we help make our community better? And if you haven't seen Dr. Bettina Love's talk on allyship versus being a co-conspirator, she did it several years back. It was an interview on C-SPAN 2 Book TV. You can Google it. It should pop right up. It's about 6 minutes long. We highly recommend that you read that or watch that video if you haven't. She does the most amazing job really highlighting what is allyship versus what is being a co-conspirator in that interview. And then we just want to make sure that we are always thinking about how do we help students become really strong, independent thinkers, right? That I don't want them to leave my classroom thinking exactly like how I think. I want them to think for themselves. I want them to be able to take in information and figure out for themselves what is the next right move. Christy, did I forget anything?
I think that was it.
Okay, great. The other part of this work is that at the end of the day, we are trying to keep kids on the planet, right? We don't want them to harm themselves or be able at some point to take their own lives. And when we want to think about keeping kids on the planet, one group of kids that we are most at risk for this is the LGBTQ plus community. Those students are more at risk for having social emotional wellness issues, right? In terms of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and they have the leading rate of suicide amongst students. Then the second most, I think, important group to be keeping our eyes on are the students from the global majority, right? That they also have social emotional needs that sometimes, if we're not watching for it, that we may not notice that we need to take care of those students in that way. And when we help kids better understand other fellow humans and understand the issues that arise in our different communities, it also helps bring down the percentage of kids who are getting bullied at school. It also brings down the number of times kids are reporting microaggressions happening at the schools, in the classroom, in the hallways, outside, when there aren't adults around. And we just want to make sure that we are building really compassionate communities. We want to move forward with this idea that they take this information and then they will go out and do something with this information to make them and the planet thrive.
Well, and something that I did want to connect with, this is not just important work for students of the global majority. Yes, we want to make sure, because our curriculum is historically white centered, and we want to bring in the different perspectives and get students, especially our students of the global majority, to see themselves. But I really want to underline the fact that this is important work for our white students as well, because it is the job of all of us, especially of those of us that have the privilege of having white skin and having all the advantages that that comes with in the world, that we have some privilege to spend, and we want to make sure we inspire each other and our students to spend a little bit of that privilege to make this place, as Corby mentioned, a more equitable society that we all want to be a part of, and we want to keep all of us here together on the planet. So a little bit of the roadmap, coming back to our title, Upping Our Read Aloud Game. As we mentioned before, engaging in discussions around social justice, transformative social emotional learning, anti-bias, anti-racist work, this is hard work. And it can be triggering, it can be exhausting. So we really wanted to underline the fact of how important building a community in your classroom is. I had the pleasure of reading Alex Vanette's book this summer, Equity Centered Trauma Informed Education. Highly recommend it. And what it really brought home to me is that we can't guarantee safety for a student, especially, I don't have the lived experience of all the students or all the families in my school. I can't guarantee their safety, but what I can do is that, and what teachers can do is invite and build structures and routines in the classroom to create that sense and feeling of safety as much as we possibly can. We want to invite students to share part of who they are, but know that they might not be ready to share all of who they are, but we definitely want them to know that when they are ready, we're there to listen, and all the students in that community around them will honor and respect their perspective and not use it in any harmful sort of way. So we can build that kind of community, and it is essential when you are doing social justice, anti-bias, anti-racist, transformative social emotional work. It is the foundation and the bedrock that needs to be there. And it's when you have those kind of experiences that kids connect so much, and you make that connection to, if you're choosing books that they get to see themselves that they don't normally do, oh my gosh, the excitement. I got to read The Proudest Blue by Ibtihaj Muhammad about a year and a half ago, during the pandemic, I believe, with a group of students. And it's about a girl and her sister, and the first time she wears hijab to school. And one of the students in the class, he was so excited. He's like, oh, my mom wears hijab. And at the end of the book, there's a beautiful author's note that gives some background and understanding of the Muslim religion and how that connects. And the boy was so excited. He went home, told his mom about the book, and he came back. He's like, oh, I'm Muslim. I didn't even know that. So we could even help students connect with parts of their identity that they weren't completely understanding or evolved about. So it's a journey of discovery together. It is never ending. It is always evolving. I will always learn more about myself and my place in this world and the people around us. And this is just when you connect your students' identities with the books and the curriculum you bring into the classroom, it is the perfect recipe for engagement. It is the perfect recipe for them to see the importance of what they're learning in class. If it makes sense and it connects to who they are, they will buy in so much more. So much more.
Well, and I love that example, Christy, of The Proudest Blue that you did. Also because I think one mistake that I have made in the past, I won't generalize it to other people, but when I was trying to incorporate more literature, more video clips, more music in my classrooms with people from the global majority, I tended to pick stories that highlighted the struggles that they had instead of also normalizing them, right? Like in that book, it's just a girl going to school and sort of like how her day went, which is very normal for her. And then it's important for kids to see themselves in that way too, that every time you pull out a book from the global majority, right, that people are like, oh, it's going to have a message. We don't want kids to think that every time they see the book. They just want to be like, great, another book with another person that may look like me or similar skin tones as me, or hey, I recognize that that person is not from my community and I'm going to learn something from this book as well.
Well, and also normalizing, characters of the LGBTQ plus community. And it just that I recently read a book, I think it was last year, Harriet Gets Carried Away. And it just so happened that there were two dads in the book, but that's not what the book was about. So I love when we can just normalize the different citizens and humans that we have around us, so that it's just so kids know how to interact, and oh, that's a normal person in my community.
Yep. All right, building a focused read aloud. So we built a pyramid here for you all to look at, like, what are the steps that we look at when we think about pulling books that are specifically targeting ABAR work, right? The anti-bias, anti-racism work, the transformative social emotional wellness that we are working on, and social justice. And also, like, how do we come up with titles, right? And so part of this is that on our Inspired Educator website, we have a list of favorite resources for all of you. And so we're just going to highlight a few of them here. If you'd like to see more of them, you can go to our website and see who else we look to when we're looking for book recommendations and ideas. So if you are a fan of Instagram, you should be following the Book Wrangler. He does an amazing job of posting a ton of picture books with the covers. He also will post it around different topics, different authors. It's fantastic. The Tutu teacher as well, she does a fantastic job of doing picture book recommendations, showing how she uses them in her own classroom as well. And then also teaching outside of the binary, so that we can think about how to include more books that talk about different gender identities, right? Because gender is very expansive, and also making sure that we include the LGBTQ plus community in our read alouds. If you are a Twitter fan, check out Pernell Rip. She's amazing. She's written several books for teachers and also teaches 7th grade. She puts up almost daily one or more book recommendations. So sometimes they're chapter books, sometimes they're picture books. They're fantastic. Also, Jess Lischitz teaches 5th grade. She does a fantastic job of posting what she's reading, what her students are reading, her read alouds, and she does a lot of ABAR work in her classroom. She freely shares her resources on her blog and her Twitter account. So check out Jess too. And then on Facebook, also Leslie Rosling is a really great one that she posts a lot of stuff to. She's written books as well. So Rosling, excuse me. So check her out. We'll have all those resources up on our website and some more if you're looking for places to start, like if you're not sure where to look at the greatest books. And also maybe people will be pointing out books that are problematic, right? Debbie Reese on Twitter also does that. She's an Indigenous educator and author and activist, and she'll point out for the Indigenous community if this is a book that she recommends because it really does reflect the Indigenous community, or if the book is problematic, and she'll point out all the places in the book where it is problematic and explain why it is. So when we think about building our read aloud, the first thing we do is we always write up an introduction. We always include the author and the title in our introduction. We try to always show pictures of authors and illustrators so students can see who is connected to these names and write. And then they can see the writers and illustrators are people from all over, not just one type of person writes books, that you can grow up to be a reader and a writer and an author and an illustrator, and you don't have to be one type of way to do that. And then what we do is we provide a brief summary of the book because we want them to understand what the book's about. We don't want them guessing or trying to figure out halfway through the book. Just like when I'm trying to pick out movies to watch, right? I'll watch a book trailer or a movie trailer to see if it's interesting, right? The same thing is that little quick summary when you're doing the book introduction helps students understand sort of like what the general book is about. And then we want to give readers an idea of what work we are going to be asking them to do in the book, right? This is not a gotcha. I'm not trying to trick them and see if they can do it. I want them to know explicitly what is it that I'm expecting them to try to practice as we read together today. And that way they also know what I'll be looking for to give feedback as we do read alouds. And then here's like the next part is like, then I have to figure out where I'm going to prompt kids in the book, right? So I generally put a couple of modeling post-its at the beginning. I want students to see me try to find places in the book where I'm asking them to do this skill work. And what does that look like? So they understand what it looks like for them as readers. And then I want them to do it with me. And then I will release it to them doing it on their own. And then I will be giving feedback during the read aloud. And so I want to find places that aren't too close together, because when I first started out, or sometimes still today, right, I have too many places where I'm stopping and pausing and having them either turn and talk or write in their journal. So I want to spread those out, and I want it to make sure it's connected to like what skill I'm asking them to practice. So if we're doing A-bar work, I want those prompts to go back to being, how are we working on being less, anti-bias, anti-racist? We want to work on those particular skills. Or if I'm looking at a component of social emotional wellness, like what skills do I need to be practicing in there? Same with social justice work. Christy, did I get it all? Did we miss anything here?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make sure that I pointed out to everyone, we start at the bottom of this pyramid and work our way up to the more focused, the more targeted. And we will link for you and our resources on our webpage. We use the social justice standards from Learning for Justice to help drive this work for us. They're an amazing resource. And they actually even then break it down into grade level bands so that you can get even more granular about the prompts and the work that you do with your kiddos. And then the social emotional learning objectives, again, a big resource that we use to help us really target and focus that work in our read alouds. So what we've done now is we have a few examples for you of read alouds that we've written up with these various lenses. And so you'll notice, so this is a book on the trap line by Indigenous author David A. Robertson and Julie Fleet. And we actually pulled out for you the specific social justice standards that we are using for this read aloud. It's so important that we make sure that we're not, trying to stop and point out every little thing that happens in a book. It's such a trap. It's so, as a teacher, you're like, teachable moment. This is so exciting. But no, research shows the attention span of a kid is, their age plus a couple minutes. So you need to think about that when you do a read alouds. If your read alouds are going for 20 or 30 minutes, sorry, friend, you lost them. So you want to make sure that you're being very specific and focused and targeted in what you're doing. But by the way, you can always go back and read the book again. We like going back and repeating books and using them with different lenses and different reasons, because we all love to repeat and use the books we love.
Well, and when you read the book more than once, you see the things that you didn't notice the first time, especially if you're looking at the book through a particular lens. So yes, try not to throw everything in there, but
and I actually have the specific advantage of, when Corby writes up read alouds for me, we usually do them in grade level bands. We'll do like a TKK book, we'll do a 1-2 book, and then we'll do all the 3 through 5. So I actually get the advantage of reading the book over and over again. And I have to say, even as an adult, every read I pick up something more and I realize another connection. So I know not all classroom teachers get that opportunity and example, but it's actually helped me be a better reader and a better teacher of reading to help kids make those connections as well. So this book we did as a social justice read aloud. And really what I want to delineate the difference between a social justice read aloud and an anti-bias, anti-racist read aloud is the social justice read aloud includes and incorporates that component of action that you get the kids to start thinking about. So we have the diversity standard there to get to know groups of people, how they've been treated in the past, what makes them who they are. But then the next step of that is students recognizing their own responsibility in standing up to the exclusion and specifically It's important when we think of indigenous authors, indigenous stories. It's so important too because the stories are erased and left out or only talked about in the past in November, sometimes in curriculum. So what I wanted to show is a little bit of modeling. So I did all of our read alouds virtually last year, just in this exact same setting, which works just as well. But then this also translates well into an in-person setting with a read aloud. As Corby mentioned, we always leave our self notes, our standards that we use, our book introductions. So I'll read you our book introduction so you can kind of get that flavor of what that kind of formula to the intro can sound like. So today I'm reading On the Trap Line by Indigenous author David A. Robinson and Julie Fleet. This story shares the experience of the main characters learning about his grandpa's childhood living on the trap line. The grandpa, or Motion, shares his Cree language and traditions. Cree are born in North American Indigenous people that live primarily in Canada. As I read, I want you to think about why it's important to hear stories about Indigenous cultures. Why are these stories often excluded from what we learn in school? How can you take action to uplift and learn these untold stories? Okay, now, friends, I want you to point to the person you're going to talk to. So, see how we did all those things? We introduced the book, we did a couple sentences, a little background. We let students know about the work that we were going to do. And then we also prompted them to set up. I'm going to be prompting them to turn and talk to a partner during this work. So then what we'll do throughout the book is we'll give prompts for students to think about. We'll do some of that modeling in the beginning so we can model the kind of thinking we want them to do. So like this one, my prompt that I left for myself here, so I'm already noticing how the author is bringing the language of the Cree culture into the book. So already having students think about those things. And then what you'll do is you'll model and then do a little release. I'm noticing the importance of family being close. What else are you noticing? Okay, turn and talk, right? Right. So giving them those prompts along the way. Another prompt, why do you think they had to be sneaky about speaking their language? So the author's talking about the grandpa, when he started going to school, they spoke English in school, but they weren't allowed to speak their Cree language. So this is such a great way for kids to explore language for themselves and what they hear. And especially if students have multiple languages, like how do they bring that part of themselves into school? So we can prompt students to turn and talk about that. Not only connecting the stories, but then connecting with their lives. And then gradually, still more connections. What connections are you finding to your own life? We want to model that and have kids help that. Why are those connections important? And then in the end, this is the action part. So the end of the book, we want to ask students, why is it important to learn about the lives of Indigenous people? What can you do to make sure these stories are heard and we learn from them? And how does this connect to your school experience? So that's really that action part. Anything else you wanted to add to that one, Corby?
I think what's nice about this book, it's a contemporary book, the author, right, is still alive. So it just highlights again that Indigenous people are still here and thriving, and not just some culture we talked about in the past, right? So it helps us bring this idea that Indigenous people are still here. They have stories that are still being told, and then looking at like, how can we make sure that this does not happen in the future? And giving time in class to have these discussions. So when you do a read aloud, if you can also buffer it so that you have time to do like a whole class share out at the end of the story, that would be very helpful in this work.
So the next example that we wanted to share with you, one of my favorite books. Oh my gosh, when Corby showed me this book, I was so excited. And so this is really a social emotional read aloud. So this is where we're asking students to bring those lenses in with them to notice how does the character, uh, when the ones we wanted to highlight for this particular read aloud was the self-management. How can we find that balance in our life, which I'm still working on in my mid 40s. So it's a lifelong experience here. And then, but also that really decision making, like how can we really notice how people take the time to make the right decisions. And this book is just so beautiful for that. And the artwork is absolutely beautiful. And I love to share that. So, um, again, we got our notes because I always like to remind myself of that. And so I'll read you this intro again to get that structure more solidified in your brain. Today, we are reading Tallulah, the Tooth Fairy CEO by Black author Dr. Tamara Pozzoli. Tallulah works to find balance in her life with her passion, her purpose, and what pays. As I read, I want you to notice what Tallulah does to find balance in her life. And how does she use these skills to help her solve a dilemma she encounters? How can you learn to help yourself in your own social emotional wellness and help your own decision making through what you learn from Tallulah? So again, my friend, point to the person you're going to turn and talk to. So again, turn in talking. So we'll just highlight a couple of the notes that we had in this book, right? Like, who doesn't want that office? So she's talking about Tallulah finds the most productive when she strikes a healthy balance, right? And then Tallulah adheres to strict schedule that keeps her both busy and fulfilled, right? All these little things and tips and tricks that we really have to be explicit about how we find balance in our life. So I did a little modeling. I'm noticing Tallulah's very purposeful in finding balance. And then she goes on to talk about her yoga routine. Again, wow, what else is she including? Museum visits, being with friends, other people. So really modeling and questioning, what are you noticing? What else is coming up for you? And then as we go through and Tallulah's doing her work as the tooth fairy, she encounters someone left her a note that saying that they lost their tooth, and she's like, I can't believe it, we've been doing this for so long and now we don't have a procedure for this. And so Tallulah goes back to the council to get input from everyone about how they should handle it, all of her tooth fairy friends, and then comes up with solution. So what I prompted for students is, what did Tallulah do to help her make a decision? How could this help you make a decision? So noticing what the character does and how we could translate that to our own lives. And what, at the end, the same thing. How does Tallulah use her passion and purpose to solve a dilemma, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, and what I like about this, Christy, too, is we want to make sure that the prompts are targeted back to social emotional for this read aloud, because it's a social emotional read aloud, give them places to practice, but also then we want the skills to be able to transfer, right? We want them to be able to use these skills in other books and in their daily lives. And so if we get really micro about it, and it's just a prompt about this book and this character at this moment, kids then can't translate it into other books. And so we want to be really mindful when we're writing these prompts up, is like, how can we make them open-ended so that kids are picking which skills to use in the moment, and then they can also transfer it when they get out of this book.
Exactly. So our final example that we wanted to share with you today is the book, The Paper Sun, The Inspiring Story of Tyrus Wang, Immigrant and Artist, by Chinese author Julie Lung and Chris Sasaki. So again, this is our anti-bias, anti-racist read aloud. So this is really about just building perspectives, building background knowledge, building an understanding of the people, especially students that would connect with being Chinese, they would have some connections to this, but also then for your students that don't have that as part of their identities, to build their empathy and compassion as well. So I'll stop sharing again one more time. I'll make this one quicker. We have our notes on the back. So today I'm going to read the story, The Paper Son, the inspiring story of Tyrus Wong, immigrant and artist. This story is a true story about Tyrus Wong. At the beginning of the story, he's 9 years old and getting on a ship from China to America. He will learn about his life in America. As I read, I want you to notice the parts of the story that are familiar to you because you have similar experience to Tyrus. And notice the parts of the story that are unfamiliar to you. What are you learning about someone else's experiences, and how are those experiences different from yours? And for this story, you need to get out your notebook and title the page with the title of the story, and then I'm going to prompt you to stop and jot. So sometimes we'll ask students, especially if they're connecting to their own experience, they might not be ready or as comfortable to share those with a classmate right away, especially if you're looking in the beginning of the year when you haven't had as much time to build that community and that sense of safety. You really want to make sure that you're not asking students to share things they're not ready to share. So sometimes that stop and jot is a better way to kind of ramp up to some of that more vulnerable sharing that you ask students to do in class. And so in this book, I'll just share a couple of the prompts. We did some thinking aloud. So just from these 2 pages, I'm noticing Tyrus's experience is different than mine. When he's coming to America by boat, he only has papers in his hand, but if I came, I'd have a lot more. And so we always like to model that. How does it connect to our life as well? And this part of the story helped me understand what the papers he was holding. I was wondering why they were coming to America and why they had to pretend to be someone else. So it really gives that background of, I'm sure a lot of families share this immigrant experience as well. And again, beautiful pictures. I love this prompt and making it connecting to, because in the story he was detained on Angel Island because he wasn't able to come into the country right away. And this part is really similar to what's happening to some people right now, especially on our southern border and being detained. So making that connection to today as well. So was there anything else you wanted to add to that read aloud for me?
Yeah, so when I do this read aloud, because I'm Chinese biracial, right, this is a very similar experience to when my grandparents came over from China to America, right? And in the beginning, he talks about how the papers that he and his dad have don't have their names. They have someone else's names. And so they have to memorize facts about the family. When my family first came over, our papers also did not have our current name, right? It took, I think, our family about 18 to 20 years to clear that up. And so coming in and understanding why they might have had papers with someone else's name on it is important. And also sort of like, how does that happen today too, right? What would have happened to my grandparents when they came over through Angel Island is different than what has happening to immigrants who are coming over today with papers that do not have their current name, right? And so it's, I think, an experience that's important to point out and also very relevant, especially if we have immigrant families or refugee families in our classroom or in our building, in our school, in our community. And also just understanding that this is an immigrant story, which is different, very different than a refugee story.
There's some beautiful refugee stories out there to share with the classroom as well. So one of the things that we wanted to touch on before we wrapped up today is, as you're starting to explore, targeted focused read alouds around the social justice, transformative SEL, and ABAR work, is that we've started doing this work with the teachers in our school about really making a plan. We focus on different SEL components throughout the year to make sure we're targeting them and then really matching them with the social justice standards. Again, this is work that you're doing, but I think if we've found that if you keep track of what you've covered and what the read alouds have been, you can know that oh, I've done all of my read alouds have been in the identity standards and the social justice standards. So you might want to start looking at some of the other areas in the standards and then just keeping track of them by grade level. So this is in a shared Google Drive that we have at our school. And then not only can the grade level itself see the work, but then also the other grade levels can see the lessons and the activities and the read alouds that other grade levels are using. We love it when you reread books and use them over and over, but if you've read the paper Sun every year, from K all the way to 5, it might be time to kind of add something else into the rotation too, so that we're sharing that across the grade levels. Is there anything else you want to share about that part?
We happen to be in probably the best time in terms of publishing for people from the global majority. There are more stories coming out. It is not the same as the stories that center characters that are white or animals. Those are significantly higher in terms of being published, but the numbers for people from the global majority, their books, their stories are increasing. And so what's important for this document for my work as a 6th grade teacher is it reminds me, what books did I do last year? And then also what books came out during the year that I might want to slide in and also then remove or add to and make like a text set as well. And so keeping notes not only helps me remember to do like social emotional work with my students, also ABAR work and social justice work, but then also what are the resources I've been using and what ones have come up during the year that I go, next year, I really want to start with that one, or it would be perfect in this unit. And then I can put it there so that I remember, because otherwise I'm going back to my lesson plans, trying to see what I did last year. And then I know some of it was out of order last year and trying to put it back in order for this year.
Well, and I also wanted to note that this work isn't separate from, this isn't, okay, now is our social justice time in our calendar. This is what we do in the day. This is really work that you can embed everywhere. And the books you choose that go with your reading, writing curriculum, the problems that you use in your math curriculum, you can really, all of this can be integrated together. It's not supposed to be an add-on, it's supposed to be a lens and a thing that you embed in all that you do. So we're really trying to work towards integrating all of this work in our school.
Yes, thank you so much for spending your morning on your weekend or whenever you're listening to this with us. We appreciate it so deeply. You can find us at theinspirededucators.com. You can find us on Twitter at theinspireded. Corby Saunders, that's me. Christy Glazier, 1 over there. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We put our email address on the slide and we hope to be working with you very soon. Good luck. Enjoy your read aloud time. It's just one way to up your game and expand what you're already doing, which is amazing work.
Thank you for being with us.